This year's Players Era NIL Festival could signal the future of college basketball, and here's why.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime college basketball podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things covering college basketball. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you all that you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. Well, the matchups for the Players Era Festival, at least the Monday and Tuesday matchups, are live. We're going to talk about those specific matchups, the ones we're excited about. We're going to get into all of that. We're also going to kind of take a look at the NIL structure, the payment now in the post-house settlement era, how it's changed, how it's the same as last year's event, and what the future for this type of event might be in the college basketball space. We're going to get into all of that over the first two segments, and then we're going to close out the show talking about conference realignment. This particular year cycle wasn't super exciting, but there's still some moves that went official on Tuesday that we're going to talk about here to close out the show. The Players Era Festival will be in its second season this year. The inaugural season was last year. The Oregon Ducks defeated the San Diego State Aztecs for to win the first ever Players Era Festival championship and earn that extra $1 million in winnings. The event will take place this year, November 24th, 25th, and 26th. That is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of Feast Week. The games will be in Las Vegas at either the MGM Garden Grand Arena or the Michelob Ultra Arena. There are 18 teams participating this year. Every team is guaranteed 3 games. The other thing every team is guaranteed is $1 million just for participating, just for being part of this event. Your college basketball program or your college university will be handed $1 million. And then again, as I stated earlier, the winning team of this event, whoever wins that championship on Wednesday night, will then be given an additional $1 million in NIL funds as well. So let's start there. Before we get into the matchups, let's talk about that and kind of what that looks like. Because last year was the first year of this event, and last year when the event happened, all the schools were given $1 million. The $1 million was not given to players directly. It was given to the university, who then dispersed the money out amongst the student athletes. So that's not really going to change in the post-house settlement era. Matt Norlander of CBS wrote a fantastic, very detailed article talking about the entirety of the Players Era Festival, but specifically talking about the impact of the house settlement on this specific event. So I'm going to quote him here. He said he's referencing the $20.5 million that every program is allowed to spend directly now on their student athletes. So every school in the country can spend $20.5 million at maximum on their student athletes. That's spread across all sports. Now, most programs do not have $20.5 million to spend. You know, like the Alabamas of the world and some of the other top tier SEC programs that are in that conference and with that amount of football money, they may already be at their $20.5 million. The programs that are not, let's use Alabama and Gonzaga as our examples here because they are one of the first matchups of the day on Monday, and because I think that they kind of represent the two different kind of likely scenarios for this money here. If you're a program like Gonzaga and you do not have $20.5 million to spend on your student athletes, the $1 million you make from this event, or $2 million if you win said event, you can just put that directly into your revenue sharing cap. So if Gonzaga has $9 million that they're planning to spend on their student athletes, they win this event, or even if they don't, they have $10 or $11 million. Again, they can just throw this straight into that pot and then distribute it as they see fit. Obviously, if they're going to distribute that money to their men's basketball team because that is who earned them said money, but it is at their discretion if they put it as part of that rev share cap money if they're not up at the $20.5 million. However, if you are at the $20.5 million, let's say Alabama is, they get their $1 million from this, that money then has to go through the NIL Go system, the software program that was created by the College Sports Commission. We went into detail on this on Monday's show. And that is a system being used to track NIL payments from third-party deals. And since this money would not be coming directly from the school, it would count as a third-party deal. And therefore, this money would be subject to the College Sports Commission's kind of evaluation of whether it is fair market value and things of that nature. Where I'm curious is if there will be any issues with this money being allocated through the NIL Go system to student athletes. My assumption is no, but I don't know if teams are going to potentially try something funky. I'm guessing probably not. Because in theory, if you're submitting this through NIL Go, you're submitting, like we'll use Alabama. You're saying, hey, we're going to pay LeBaron Philon $250,000. And we're going to pay him to do media appearances at the Players Era Festival, autograph signing, social media posts, whatever things they ask LeBaron Philon to do, he will be compensated for that at $250,000. If Alabama also submits that same exact thing with the same exact requirements for Houston Millett, and they say we're going to pay Houston Millett $4,000, I could see the NIL Go system flagging that and saying, hey, you can't ask these two guys to do the same stuff and pay one of them way more money than the other one, because that just looks like pay for play, which it would be pay for play. My assumption is that Alabama in this situation would just pay all of their student athletes equally from the basketball team in order to prevent there from being any issues or flagging on those NIL Go payments. But it is something that we should be keeping an eye on. It's something that is interesting. If the NIL Go system does not kind of create any hiccups for the teams that are using it for their payments from the Players Era Festival, that kind of gives the green light for this festival to not only continue, but expand. It's hoping to be at 32,000 next, or 32 teams, not 32,000, 32 teams next year after being at 18 this year. I have a feeling that if this goes off without a hitch, if all the payments clear, which they did last year, if the NIL Go system doesn't flag anything, then we're just good to go. We're marching on, and there'll be a 32-team event next year, and that could continue to dampen the dreams and hopes of things like the Maui Invitational and the Battle for Atlantis. Is how can they compete trying to get programs when everybody wants to go join the program that just hands you a check for $1 million that you can disperse however you see fit? That's a pretty darn good deal that any team would be stupid to turn down. And so I think as long as that continues to happen, this event is going to thrive in the college basketball MTE space. All right, let's talk matchups here. We'll talk Monday matchups quickly, and then we'll get into the Tuesday matchups and the championship and how that's going to work with 18 teams playing 2 games each on Monday and Tuesday. It's going to get a little wonky to determine who plays in that championship game on Wednesday. Here are your Monday matchups. Again, these matchups are November 24th. We do not know the location of these games. Again, either MGM Garden Grand or Michelob Ultra Arena in Vegas. We also don't know the TV information, although it sounds like it'll be Warner Brothers Discovery, which means it'll probably be TNT, TBS, or HBO Max. Here are your matchups. Number 1, Tennessee versus Rutgers. Some SEC Big Ten action at 1 p.m. Then you got Baylor versus Creighton. That's a very fun one between two exciting teams that kind of were coming off down years last year. So we'll see who's kind of rebounding first. That game at 2 p.m. Kansas taking on Notre Dame. Good chance to see Darren Peterson in action for Bill Self's team at 3:30 p.m. St. John's versus Iowa State. That's going to be a nasty matchup with a lot of defense and physicality. Should be a fun one. 4:30 p.m. And you got Houston versus Syracuse at 6. Oregon versus Auburn. That should be a ranked game right there. That's at 8 p.m. And then Alabama versus Gonzaga. That's a really fun one. These two teams played a home-and-home series a few years ago that was electric. I think one of them was 100-90 was the final score. That game tipping off at 9:30 Eastern time. And then with apologies to the Terps fans, they play UNLV at midnight Eastern time. That is a rough draw for Maryland. If you're a Terps fan out living in the Maryland area, you better have a lot of coffee on you for that game, because it's going to be a late one for those fans watching them take on the hometown UNLV running Rebels in that matchup on Monday. But Tuesday's slate is arguably just as exciting, if not more so. It features a Sweet 16 rematch from last year, as well as last year's Players Era Championship matchup. We're going to break those down and talk about that championship coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever wished managing your money just felt a little bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO. It gives you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a generic budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in just one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. I found that I really love having everything financial all in one app. It's just so much simpler. I don't have to remember a bunch of different apps, have a folder full of them on my phone. I just go straight to Monarch, and that makes the day-to-day management so much easier. So take control of your finances by using Monarch Money. And use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com. And folks, you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast here. And we're still breaking down the Monday and Tuesday matchups for the Players Era Festival, the second annual Players Era Festival taking place in Las Vegas this year. Of course, it made a lot of headlines for paying every team that participated last year $1 million in NIL funds. They're doing the same this year. It's at least a $20 million investment, with 18 teams taking home $1 million and the winning team taking home an additional $1 million as well. We talked about the Monday matchups. Now we're going to take a look at the matchups taking place on Tuesday, and then we'll talk about what that means for Wednesday, where the championship and the other consolation games will take place. Tuesday, November 25th. Again, all of these game times are Eastern time, and all of these matchups are, of course, we do not know where they will be between the Garden Grand Arena and the Michelob Ultra Arena, or where on TV they will be. We'll have that information as we get closer to said events. First game of the day on Tuesday, Rutgers taking on Notre Dame. Admittedly, not the most exciting matchup of the day here, especially as Rutgers no longer features, I assume, will not feature 2 top 5 picks in the NBA draft for Steve Pikiell's club this upcoming season. After that, the next game, this is a fun one. Iowa State taking on Creighton. That Blue Jays team is going to face some serious physicality with Iowa State, with Joshua Jefferson and Milan Momcilovic coming back for Coach TJ Otzelberger's club. That game at 2:30 Eastern time. An hour later at 3:30 Eastern time, we'll have Kansas versus Syracuse. Another fun one here. Again, another opportunity to see Darren Peterson for Bill Self and the Jayhawks, and Flory Badunga. The Syracuse team is looking improved as well. I'm still not sold on Red Autry and the proof that he can kind of be the guy who replaces Jim Boeheim. Not that it was ever going to be an easy task, but they haven't really had a ton of success yet. But this roster, this is a big test for him. And I think, I'm not saying it's got to be Kansas in order to prove it, or Houston. They're 2 really brutal matchups. But if you look competitive in both those games, that's going a long ways towards being competitive when you get into ACC play a few months later. Next up, we got St. John's versus Baylor. That's a fantastic one. Rick Pitino, Scott Drew, obviously a very, very new look Baylor roster. They replaced everybody on that team, but they got some real talent on that roster. Dan Skillings and Mikey Ratai coming in. And they got a high-level freshman coming in as well, versus St. John's team that's going to be very, very good next year, with Zuby Ejiofor coming back, Bryce Hopkins being added to the front court, a very fun backcourt with Ian Jackson, Oziah Sellers, Dylan Darling, a couple others coming in, Josan Sonone from Arizona State as well. Then you got Houston versus Tennessee, 2 defensive stalwarts. That's going to be a first to 55 type situation for Kelvin Sampson and Rick Barnes. Nate Ament and Chris Senack, 2 of the best freshmen in the country, going to square off in the front court in that matchup. Should be a fun one as well. That game is at 6 p.m. Eastern time. St. John's Baylor at 5 Eastern time, by the way. And then we got a Sweet 16 rematch from last year. 1 seed Auburn, 5 seed Michigan. They're squaring off here at 8:30 Eastern time. This might be the game of the day. This might be the game of the first 2 days. What an incredible matchup this is going to be. Obviously, so many of the big players from last year's game are not going to be there. Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf both out the door in the NBA, alongside Janai Broom and many of those veteran players for Auburn, but Todd Pettiford is back for the Tigers. They add Keyshawn Hall and Keyshawn Murphy out of the transfer portal. Meanwhile, this Michigan team, they get Yaxel Lendeberg, they get Elliot Cadeau from North Carolina. This is going to be a real fun one. Two great coaches. There's a lot to like about this Michigan-Auburn game. Hour after that, we get Gonzaga taking on Maryland, Buzz Williams, and the Terps. Be fun to see what that team looks like. They'll get that UNLV game to start it off, and then now a big test for them against Gonzaga. Interestingly, Maryland starts two backcourt players who were formerly at Washington State, which is just about 75 miles from Gonzaga, in Miles Rice, who, of course, was at Wazoo before going to Indiana and now at Maryland, and Isaiah Watts, who transferred directly from Wazoo to Maryland. Will be fun to see how those two former Cougars squaring off against a regional rival in Gonzaga. One of many storylines that should be extra fun in that game. And then you get the rematch of last year's Players Era Festival Championship. Dana Altman and the Oregon Ducks taking on Brian Dutcher, and the Aztecs of San Diego State. Oregon returns Jackson Shellstad. They return KJ Evans. They return Nate Biddle. Should be real fun to see how this team looks with that amount of talent coming back to the program. San Diego State, similar situation. Nobody expected them to get both Magoon Guath to get Magoon Guath back this year. This is a really, really talented San Diego State team in their final year in the Mountain West before, of course, they joined the Pac-12 the following season. So rematch from last year should have plenty of intrigue in that one at 11 p.m. Eastern time. At least both those teams are based on the West Coast, because this last matchup, once again, UNLV at midnight, but this time they're taking on Alabama. So if you, in the first segment, if you chuckled at the Maryland fans and now you're somebody out in Tuscaloosa, sorry, another day that you're going to have some coffee to watch that one tipping off at midnight on Tuesday, November 25th. So then Wednesday will be the final day. None of these matchups are to be determined because they will all be determined based on how these teams perform in the first games on Monday and Tuesday. The third place game will take place at 7 p.m. Eastern time. The championship game will take place at 9 p.m. Eastern time. The rest of the games presumably will be before that, scattered throughout the day. Here's what we know. This is again quoting the great Matt Norlander from his article at CBS. He says, quote, "Teams that go 2-0 on Monday and Tuesday will pool into the championship round on Wednesday. Point differential, total points scored, and points allowed will all affect the tally and serve as tiebreakers, just like in 2024. So effectively, every team that goes 2-0 will be lumped together, and then they will determine based on how many more points you scored than your opponents, your total amount of points scored, and your total amount of points allowed, I assume in that sequential order, will be used to determine whether you are in the championship game, whether you are in the third place game, or whether you're in the fifth place game, seventh place game, whatever it may be, obviously eventually getting to the point where you're out of 2-0 teams, so you take the 1-1 teams, the 0-2 teams, and you match them up that way. This is not a sustainable model. It makes sense in this specific environment for a wonky 18-team event where you're trying to get a real champion in that amount of time. There's not much more you can do other than segmenting all of these teams out into mini brackets, which is what they wanted to avoid for this go-round. That is what will eventually happen. That is what will eventually happen if this event becomes a 32-team field, which is what they're planning to be in 2026 and most assume will happen. Then it will become more of a mini brackets, and they will in fact have it kind of be pre-qualifiers like they do in the Olympics. You'll have events taking place 2 weeks or 1 week before the actual festival, and there'll be these little mini pods, and those teams that play in those pods, maybe only the winner advances or the top two teams advance to the actual festival taking place over Feast Week. So that's what this is going to look like in 2026. But for this year, it's kind of unfortunate for teams that maybe drew tougher schedules than others. Like I think about like the Gonzaga, UNLV, Alabama, Maryland kind of quartet. Gonzaga draws Alabama and Maryland, whereas both Bama and Maryland get a game against UNLV. And no disrespect to UNLV, maybe they'll take a leap here with the new coaching staff. But in theory, the Gonzaga's got a tougher matchup than those teams. And I think for starters, well, I'm not going to assume Gonzaga's going to go 2-0. That's a tough assignment for them. But if they are in a position where it's like, oh, they won both their games, but they only won them both by 6 points, and then another team that had weaker opponents ends up with a higher margin, again, it's not going to be perfect. And there's going to be some grubbing. There's going to be some whining. There's going to be some, hey, I think that, this didn't set us up well, or this was unfortunate that it didn't go our way. Like, it is what it is. Ultimately, all these teams are A, pocketing $1 million just for showing up and being there for the basketball games, and B, like, if you go 2-0, you get a chance to compete for a third game. You're going to play somebody good. Maybe you don't play the best team. Maybe you don't get to play for the championship the way you wanted to, but you're going to play somebody good. You're going to get 3 great non-conference games, and you're going to get $1 million. It's hard to be too upset about that, especially when we make the assumption that this specific format, which maybe isn't ideal, is at least going to clearly change for next year, again, assuming that expansion to 32 teams does in fact happen. Well, folks, we're going to move on for our final topic of the day. We're going to talk conference realignment. Kind of had a gap year this year. Last year was a huge round of realignment with the dissolution of the Pac-12. Next year is going to be the new look Pac-12 and some kind of down movement in other conferences on the West Coast in particular. But this year, just a new era for a handful of programs, albeit one of them is John Calipari's old stomping grounds. We're going to talk about that, what these changes mean for college hoops, coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still locked on college basketball, closing out the show, talking about the realignment moves, the conference realignment moves that went official on July 1st, Tuesday of this year. So yesterday, as most of you are listening to this show, there were a handful of conference realignment moves that became finalized that day. And most of the attention on conference realignment right now has been on the moves that are going to take place next year. Texas State being added to the Pac-12 was the big one that happened this week. And obviously the Pac-12 new look conference with the 5 Mountain West schools, Gonzaga, and now Texas State. Like, that's been the big storyline. And there's been some other movement in some smaller conferences out west because of that. But there were a handful of moves, again, that were reported a year ago, or some cases 18 months ago, something like that are now finalized. We're going to take a look at what those moves are going to do for college basketball this year. The most notable team that just moved on Tuesday is UMASS, the Minutemen, going from the A10 to the MAC. And folks, this is a bummer. There's not really any other way to break this down. This was a move made purely for football reasons. The A10 as a conference does not support football. UMass was playing their football independently. They have opted to take all of their sports to the MAC conference instead, where their football will be sponsored. I'm not saying I blame UMass for doing this. If anything, I would blame the system that so heavily favors football, but they're going from a conference that last year was 8th in college basketball, according to KenPom's net ranking, to a conference that was 23rd. This is a dramatic drop for the Minutemen, a program that has a rich history of basketball success. Not as much recently. They might fit into the MAC a little bit more smoothly because they haven't been very good in the Frank Martin era, but this is still sad to see. Last year, UMass was 222nd at KenPom. That would have been 6th in the MAC. Their program rating, which is data that goes back to 1997, has UMass 137th in college basketball in that time. That would be 3rd among MAC schools. So maybe a chance for UMass to start competing more to make the NCAA tournament, but as an auto bid that's going to be like a 14 seed, it's just not as fun. It was better when they were in the A10, but moves had to be made, and this is maybe not the most fun one, but it is a move that ostensibly makes sense for UMass to keep their football program alive. Next up is a more fun move, Seattle U joining the WCC from the WAC, which RIP to the WAC, by the way, the WAC falling completely apart, and the remaining schools, which there was just 4 of, are merging with the ASUN to form the United Alliance Conference, so the UAC. Seattle U getting out before the thing completely sank. They're going from the 15th ranked conference in the WAC to the 7th ranked conference in the WCC. Last year, Seattle U was 145th at KenPom. That'd be 7th in the WCC. Their program ranking, though, is 196th, which would be last. Of course, they were not a D1 program until 2009, so it's a little hard to judge them based on that. Seattle U also used to be in the WCC back in 1971 through 1980. They were part of the conference when it was called the WCAC, and then they went down to the D3 level all the way until 2009. So now they are finally back in their original conference. Good to have them in the WCC, only competing against Gonzaga and Oregon State and Washington State for a year, but at least they will get those matchups once before the conference drops down to being a 9-team league after that. 2 programs making football moves into Conference USA. Both these programs are doing this so that they can begin playing FBS football. They were at the FCS level. So in order to bump up to the FBS level, they had to switch conference allegiances. That would be Delaware and Missouri State. Delaware going from CAA to CUSA. So that's from the 20th ranked conference to number 9. At Ken Palm last year, Delaware, the Blue Hens, 235th, which would be 9th out of the 10 schools in Conference USA last year. Their program rating over the last 25 plus years is 191st, which would be 9th. So not expected to jump in and immediately compete from a basketball perspective, but again, move made primarily for football reasons. However, Missouri State has a better chance of competing more immediately in Conference USA, although they were not great last year either, 239th at Ken Palm, which actually is right behind Delaware. But they're coming from the Missouri Valley, so they're going from the 10th ranked conference to the 9th ranked conference. And from a program rating perspective, because of some historic success about a decade or so ago for Missouri State, they're actually 115th in the program rating, which is 3rd out of the 12 schools in Conference USA. So potential for Conference USA to get a little bit better with Missouri State coming in, although Delaware probably going to be more of a negative than a positive for the strength of the conference overall on the men's basketball side of things. The last move to talk about here is New Haven. New Haven going from the Division II level up to the NEC. The NEC is the lowest ranked conference at the D1 level, but it is still better than being at the D2 rank. So this is obviously a positive move for New Haven. The Chargers went just 12-17 at the D2 level last year, but back in 2023, so 2 years ago, they did make the Elite 8 at the D2 level. So there is some basketball success for this program. Be fun to see how they compete in their first couple of years in the NEC as members of the D1 level. And like we said, future moves are going to be even bigger. This is kind of the eye of the storm, almost the middle year for these big conference realignment moves. Like we said last year, the Pac-12, dispersing amongst the Big 10, Big 12, WCC to an extent, and ACC. And then now this year, or this upcoming year, when we have our next wave of realignment, we'll have the 5 Mountain West schools that are joining the Pac-12. That's Colorado State, Utah State, Boise State, San Diego State, and Fresno State. They are joining Oregon State and Washington State, who will kind of restart the Pac-12. Of course, Gonzaga and now Texas State joining that new conference as well. In response to that, the Mountain West has added 4 programs to backfill. They've added Grand Canyon from the WAC, Hawaii from the Big West, UC Davis also from the Big West, and then UTEP, Texas, El Paso coming into the Mountain West as well. The Big West, having lost a few of teams to the Mountain West, has added Utah Valley, Cal Baptist, and Sacramento State to their conference. Utah Valley and Cal Baptist both in the WAC. So as we mentioned, the WAC, eventually, if every conference has to backfill, they lose somebody to a bigger conference, they backfill from a smaller conference, that conference backfills from another smaller conference. Eventually, you run out of conferences to backfill from. And that's what happened to the WAC. The Big West takes Utah Valley and Cal Baptist. The Mountain West takes Grand Canyon. The WCC takes Seattle U. Suddenly, you just don't have a conference anymore. And that's more or less what happened. Like we said, the 4 other schools, I think it was Tarleton State, Sam Houston, Abilene Christian, and UT Arlington, I think were the 4 that were left. They all find themselves just merging with the ASUN in order to still be viable and alive. Sac State comes from the Big Sky. The Big Sky didn't make any moves to replace them just yet, but certainly we'll keep an eye on if there are any moves that happen out west as this kind of the down movement of these conferences from the seismic shift that was the Pac-12 falling apart, still having ramifications here on these West Coast teams in the college basketball space. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much, folks, for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac and Leek will be back with you all on Thursday, and then Isaac and I will be wrapping up the week with you on Friday. Plenty of still to get to, some FIBA performances, Summer League coming up for the NBA. We'll talk about that, some recruiting, some transfer portal stuff, more realignment, all sorts of fun stuff here on the Locked On College Hoops show. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. Let's go Wild Popes. And until next time, peace out.